Good evening. I'm Brooke Goldstein, and welcome to the premiere episode of Outspoken. My vision for the show is to present an unfiltered take on some of the most pressing issues facing the Jewish community and the West at large. Each week, a topic will be tackled without the constraints of political correctness. We're going to have guests that have distinct perspectives that aren't here just to rehash the same old talking points and preach to the choir. I'll speak to you frankly, and I'll speak frankly with my invitees and ask the difficult and sometimes awkward questions necessary to get to the bottom of things. We're going to get real here in this space. Outspoken is a platform where facts matter, not feelings. So tonight, we're going to talk about what everybody seems to be talking about, the campus space, but from a slightly different perspective, because I'm angry. In fact, I'm really angry about what's going on. The rampant civil rights violations against Jewish students, the free speech violations, the outright harassment at federally funded schools. Jewish students are afraid to wear their skull caps, their Stars of David on American campuses. They take circuitous routes to class to avoid harassment. They choose not to take certain classes at all because they'll be targeted by professors for being Zionists. And it gets worse. Jewish students are subjected to physical threats and assaults on campus. Yes, you heard me right. Jewish students are getting beaten up on campus in the United States of America. Daniel Visal, a student at Temple University of all places, was punched in the face by an associate of Students for Justice in Palestine. At San Francisco State University, a student posted a picture of himself on Facebook with a knife, calling for the murder of Jews. And tonight, you're going to hear about how a female student at NYU was just recently assaulted. What is this? 1938? Enough is enough. And yet me declaring so on TV isn't enough either. I'm not going to solve the problem by ranting. The millions of dollars that we're pouring into pro-Israel advocacy groups isn't moving the needle forward. The opposite. Things are getting worse. Every year we see an uptick in campus anti-Semitism. How is this still happening? As a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and I'm afraid. And you should be too, not just for Jews, but for America. There's a reason why the campus is being used as a strategic battleground to indoctrinate the next generation into radical hatred. The same reason that Arab dictatorships are pouring their dollars into Middle Eastern studies departments, because these are the future leaders of America. These are the people who are going to be shaping our domestic and foreign policies, who are going to be running for office and dictating the platform of our political parties. Everybody's talking about the campus problem, but they're giving us the politically correct version of the debate. They're selling us a problem that can be solved with more funding, with more of the same pro-Israel advocacy. But I dare say, we are on a trajectory towards failure. Why? For two reasons. Number one, we are not aggressive enough. Could you imagine if a black student was beaten up at UCLA or at NYU? The African American community would be vocally livid, and rightfully so. They would be staging massive protests. Al Sharpton would be on every television news network from CNN to MSNBC screaming bloody murder. School administrators would be bending over backwards to create safe spaces and enacting policies to punish the perpetrators of this racist hatred. But they don't give Jews the same treatment, the same respect, because we don't demand it. Not only do we not demand it, but we discourage those in our community who do. Now, some of you may know that I run a litigation fund called the Lawfare Project. We finance some of the most groundbreaking lawsuits on behalf of the Jewish people around the world, setting precedents that change the status quo, suing schools that have a long history of verbally appeasing the Jewish community while turning around and unlawfully acting on their biases. I'll never forget the time I was accused of being too aggressive. They said I was too insistent on taking people to court when they flagrantly flout the law and trample on the rights of Jewish citizens. Too proactive in enforcing the civil rights of the Jewish community. Now, does that make any sense? They said, "Shah, still." We wrote a letter. We're working behind the scenes. Don't upset the administration while we spend the next 10 years negotiating piecemeal with them on your client's behalf. As if that kind of quiet advocacy is really effective. Why are we so ashamed to scream at the top of our lungs that we deserve equal protection under the law, and if we don't get it, then we will fight for our rights like every other oppressed minority is entitled to do so? The second reason we're handicapped is because we're not using our collective efforts effectively. And I know you've heard this before, but listen carefully. The defensive position does not work. All the pro-Israel parades and videos and pamphlets talking about how Israel is a democracy, how we have Arab Knesset members, how we have the largest gay pride parade in the Middle East. It isn't enough. It's not sufficient to say no. Please believe us. We're not the monsters they paint us to be. We must turn the tables. We must give those students who are thirsty for human rights advocacy a real cause to march against. That is the gender, race, and religious apartheid happening in every single Muslim majority country in the world. They want a cause to protest? How about female genital mutilation? How about the enslavement of hundreds of thousands of Africans in Islamic dictatorships? How about the recruitment of innocent Muslim children towards suicidal, homicidal violence? But you can't talk about that, because then you're an Islamophobe. Well, my friends, if raising awareness about human rights violations against innocent women and children is anti-Muslim, what then is pro-Muslim? How on earth are we supposed to engage in intersectionality and build our bridges with other targeted minorities if we don't have the courage to speak out against those who are the oppressors? How is it that every pro-Israel group does not have it written as an essential element of their 501c3 mission statement to advocate for similarly situated minorities? This isn't deflection, it's genuine activism. I'm so frustrated with our communal disabilities. But what does give me hope are the guests that we have tonight, because they're not your typical advocates. They are fierce, they are outspoken, they have pride, and they have an offensive strategy. I'm so pleased to be joined by three incredible, motivated, and outspoken Jewish student advocates who have a lot to teach us about pride and proactive strategies. Rudy Rochman is the founder of Students Supporting Israel at Columbia University and a recent graduate. Adela Cojab is the president of Realize Israel at NYU and a former student government senator going into her senior year. And Justin Feldman, formerly at Santa Monica College, where he was the president of Students Supporting Israel, recently transferred to UCLA and is going into his junior year there. Everybody, welcome to Outspoken. Thank you for taking the time. Rudy, I'm going to start with you. What makes Students Supporting Israel, or SSI, different from any other pro-Israel advocacy group?
Well, first of all, who we are and also what we do. Who we are is a grassroots student movement, meaning we're not based on outside organizations pushing materials onto students. We're based on empowering the actual students there. We also understand that every campus is different, so every campus has to do their own thing, but at the same time, we're all connected. Secondly, what we do, we're not right-wing, one state, two state, left-wing. We're not here to push a political agenda onto a democratic country. We're here to empower Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, and their story and their culture.
So that's an essential difference. It's not about pro-Israel advocacy per se. It's about civil rights advocacy and being a proud Zionist.
Exactly. I take the term advocacy as almost a cheerleader. We're not cheerleaders. We're players on the team. And we don't use advocacy, we use activism. And we talk about the rights of the Jewish people and their connection to their land.
And so the events that you do, have they ever tried to shut you down? And how do you overcome that?
They can always try. I mean, they come to campus, they come and shout, but eventually campus security escorts them out. They've tried to pull down our flyers. They've tried many different tactics to silence us. But in reality, it's up to us if we choose to be silenced or not.
So you're not going to be intimidated. And Adela, tell us, what is the atmosphere like at NYU today? Do Jewish students feel comfortable being themselves? Are they physically threatened?
NYU changed tremendously in the last 4 months, from student government resolutions to disruptions at events to actually a student being physically assaulted.
Physically assaulted?
Physically assaulted. At one of our events, we actually had a rave in the park that we do every year for Yom HaAtzmaut. Nothing was different about this year, except that there was a mobilized protest on the other side. 2 members from the protesting groups, one of them stole one of our Israeli flags, lit it on fire, starting a 5-foot flag fire in the middle of a New York public park. Another crossed to our side, took the microphone from a female student, grabbing her arm, all this on tape.
So assault, physical destruction of private property. And what does the administration do? Do they take this seriously?
So that's actually a great question. Those 2 students were arrested by NYPD and let off without bail, but the administration, for some reason, doesn't seem to be doing much against it. So right now, I guess our main challenge is working with the administration to say if NYPD felt compelled to arrest 2 individuals for reckless endangerment on an NYU campus, why is the administration letting them roam our halls?
So do you think SJP, which I'm assuming is one of the groups that is behind this Students for Justice in Palestine, do you think they should be banned from NYU?
After the incidents that happened at our rave, SJP and JVP actually stood with their comrades and organized a sit-in in the courthouse, and they camped overnight. They had over 70 students there. If someone from my side physically assaulted someone from the other side, as a president of a club, I would be horrified and denounce those actions.
They are not peaceful activists.
No, they're not.
No, they are not human rights activists. And Justin, I want to bring you in. Why has the other side, so to speak, been so successful with their advocacy? Does it have something to do with this intersectionality thing we hear
So much
about?
of their activism has involved reaching out and branching out to so many different cultural and political groups on campus, in many different campuses across the nation and at large in the world. And the way that they're able to send their message is through their legitimization of being present. And what pro-Israel activists need to do to reach out and delve into that intersectional narrative that is developing the future of this country is to be present as genuine allies for various causes and to start telling our narrative equally in that exchange instead of being submissive allies or instead of being out of the picture wholesome.
Right, and so telling our narrative, it's not again about talking about pro-Israel stuff. It's about telling about the indigenous Jewish people, the story of the Jewish people, and
Absolutely.
Zionism being a progressive value. It's about being on the offense, not the defense, is it not?
Absolutely. I think being on the offensive means setting the terms for yourself, for your organization, for the pro-Israel cause at large, and not bending to the standards at which you're being subjected by the anti-Israel presence or movements on campus. These campaigns cannot delegitimize us for who we are so long as we know our narrative and we know how to tell our narrative and embrace that narrative in various different activities.
Have you ever felt physically threatened on an American campus? Have you witnessed anyone being threatened or assaulted?
I have felt physically threatened. Actually, as recently as a few weeks ago, at one of our recent events at UCLA, co-sponsored by SSI of Santa Monica College, we had lots of pushing aside of students trying to get inside to protest and shut down our event. So I've experienced that myself, and I've seen further assault happening to other Jewish students on campus. Thankfully, I myself have not experienced that to that degree.
Mm-hmm. Rudy, has the pro-Israel community failed our students? I mean, we spend so much money on advocacy, and yet things are getting worse. What can we do different?
I mean, as long as we're here, we haven't failed. The question is, where do we move from here? Okay, and it's our job in our generation to realize what is the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist movement of this generation. What are they doing to try to destroy us? And instead of being the counter movement to the already counter movement to our right to exist, we have to take our movement and lift it up in itself. We also have to understand what is the story of Israel. The story of Israel is not the story of cherry tomatoes, waste, technology, drip irrigation. Israel has a right to exist because we're talking about a native people that were displaced from their land by Western imperial powers or other invaders, were persecuted throughout their history in diaspora, and eventually created something called Zionism, which is the most successful indigenous liberation movement that ever existed.
You know, it sounds to me like the mirror effect, the story of being kicked out of your land, subject to apartheid, subject to colonialism, yearning for the right to return. That's our story.
Yes.
And yet the Palestinian Arabs have appropriated that story and they have used it, and then they're turning it against us. It is so bizarre. You know, what would it take not only for other students to take our movement seriously, but the administration to take seriously. What is your advice to students in terms of how to be organized and how to deal with the administration, Adela?
I think a lot of it is just knowing where you stand, knowing the people that are supporting you, and making sure that everything is on record. I know from my work working with the administration and with any organization, it's when you have a meeting with someone, you have to make sure to follow up and to always have everything down. Because if you spoke to an administrator about something and they don't follow through, you need that paper trail to say, we spoke about this and you are not fulfilling your duty to the students.
And Justin, do you think there's a role here for the legal community, not pro-Israel advocacy groups, but lawyers to help students on campus, either dealing with the administration or filing claims when necessary?
Undoubtedly, absolutely. I believe that students need to know their rights. They need to be aware of what it is that they can do to be able to take justice into their own hands when the administration is either obstructionist or is not doing their fair share to hold students to the full extent of the law universally. So lawyers and legal assistants can help students and empower them to feel a motivation to pursue their rights and pursue their justice and know about these rights.
And not to be ashamed.
Not to be
we
ashamed.
have every right to assert ourselves like any other minority group. So if you were to say one thing to students who are coming to campus now, one piece of advice, Justin, what would it be?
Be proactive. Set the standards yourself and do not bend to other people that are trying to delegitimize who you are and your cause, for any cause. And that's my best advice to anyone who's trying to get involved and to change and break complacency on campus to mobilize students as a unified community.
Right, mobilize ahead of time. Don't be reactive. Don't wait for something to happen and then have to be reactive to it, but be proactive. Adela.
As a Mexican, Syrian, Jewish woman, the hardest thing for me is being afraid of being myself. So if I could tell any student coming into campus is you fight for what you believe in and don't let anyone around you tell you otherwise. Understand your narrative and be able to put it forward.
Rudy.
Know your story, because if you don't, other people will tell it for you.
Brilliant. That's great. I am so grateful for the three of you for coming on. Yashar koach. Keep doing what you're doing. Fight the good fight. We are always available for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My next guest is someone I've had the pleasure of working with for quite some time, who I admire as an outspoken, intelligent, and excellent attorney, and who I'm also delighted to call my good friend, COO and Director of Legal Research at the Lawfare Project, Benjamin Ryberg. Welcome to Outspoken.
Thank you so much for having me, Brooke. I have to say, it's taken us 8 years of working together to finally be on TV together.
That's funny. So Ben, let's make the best use of it. What do you see happening right now on campus? Are students aware of their rights? Are they enforcing their legal rights?
It's a great question. Students have generally no idea what their legal rights are. Perhaps that's the community's fault, our fault, for not prepping them at a younger age, giving them the basics to know what their rights are and how they can assert them when they go to college. But frankly, there's a larger problem I see, that you have so-called pro-Israel and Jewish organizations. I'm not going to refer to anybody specifically here, but these groups that are very well known, that are present on campuses across the United States, are actively discouraging the students from asserting their rights.
Excuse me? Did I just hear you right? We have pro-Israel advocacy groups discouraging Jewish students from enforcing their rights? Why is that?
It sounds incredibly counterintuitive. Frankly, I don't want to speak for them. My guess is that it makes them look like they're not doing their jobs. They're there to protect, to provide a home away from home for Jewish students. They're not doing so. Or perhaps it's for other reasons.
You know, so the campus situation has gotten so bad and they're completely ineffective that students have to file lawsuits, and it basically makes them look bad, so they're discouraging students. That is absolutely disgusting. But, you know, on a positive note, tell me a little bit about, I don't know, maybe like 3 examples of when you have worked with students on campuses and how you've gotten a positive result.
Absolutely. So we were contacted by a student at Boston University who had been harassed, intimidated, targeted very viciously by one of his professors who was rampantly pro-Israel. By targeted, I mean he would be sitting in class and be berated, kicked out of class. Things really culminated, though, when the student who had been previously granted special testing accommodations by the university was told on the day of his exam that these testing accommodations were being denied.
So there was retaliation against this student for being pro-Israel, for being Zionist by his teacher. And what happened?
Exactly. So we worked with the student behind the scenes, and we helped him, prepared him to deal with the administration. Ultimately, his grade was expunged, and that professor is no longer teaching at the school.
Right. And I also mentioned in my intro what happened at Temple University. You worked with Daniel Vassell, right?
Yes, indeed. When the student Daniel Vassell approached a table of SJP at a club fair just to ask them about their positions and such, he was punched in the face by one of their friends, affiliates, whatever you want to call them, and didn't know what to do.
So what kind of legal assistance did you provide?
Within 24 hours, we had arranged for him a team of 3 pro bono attorneys.
And pro bono means free.
Free of charge, no cost to the student whatsoever. They helped him prepare a complaint, and ultimately the student, the assailant, was prosecuted, and he was given community service, forced to pay court fees, and issue a public apology.
And so, just to sum up, I mean, can you just explain in brief what is the First Amendment right of a student on a federally funded campus or government-funded campus?
Sure. So if you're in a public school, your First Amendment right is essentially that you get to say what you want, bring in speakers when you want, regardless of the topic, regardless of whether it's controversial. There are some very limited exceptions, but for the most part, if you want to bring in a pro-Israel speaker, for instance, you have the right to do so.
And if the school shuts you down?
The school shuts you down, you could have a lawsuit. I certainly never advise threatening suit as being the first step in the journey. But frankly, if you call an organization like the Lawfare Project, we've done this before. We tell students about what their First Amendment rights are. We prepare them to go in to meet with administrators and say, listen, this is your obligation. I am paying tuition. The law says X, Y, Z. I want to do my event. Please make it happen.
Amazing. So students could definitely benefit from receiving the excellent legal advice from people like you and obviously other attorneys at the Lawfare Project. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for being with us. I appreciate it. Every week, Outspoken is going to end in a very special way. I want to close each program by talking to my dad for a moment, Stormin Norman Goldstein, who's up in Toronto. Dad, how are you doing today?
Fine. How are you down in New York?
Good. Thanks, Dad. So you went to the University of Western Ontario in Canada. How did you express your pride in being Jewish when you were a student?
I expressed my pride as a Jew and student by wearing my Never Again badge. When I was in New York, I obtained a badge from the JDL group, and it was a Jewish star in yellow emboldened with the words Never Again.
So you basically took what was a Nazi symbol, the yellow star, you sewed it onto your sleeve and you wore it as a symbol of pride. But did you ever experience anti-Semitism on campus?
Most people were curious as to why I wore that badge, and that gave me a chance to discuss the Holocaust in the young state of Israel. I even had my bar mitzvah in Israel in 1963, which was very meaningful to me, coming from parents who were Holocaust survivors. But I did have one really bad anti-Semitic incident when I was in the school pub, and a few members of the football team came over to me and started to harass me, and then they started to assault me and push me around and beat me up a little bit. But fortunately, I was able to break away from the group, and eventually I went and I informed the police, and they were charged with assault.
That's really good that you proactively stood up for yourself and that the administration did the right thing. What advice do you have for Jewish students on campus who are today facing the type of rampant discrimination that we haven't seen in years?
My advice to students who are harassed for being Jewish is to push back. Complain to the university authorities. Talk to the Jewish organizations on and off campus. Demand your human rights to be respected and have free opinions. And if you are assaulted, you should call the police. Not campus police, but the real police. Call the press. Make a big stink. Seek out legal aid and see if you can sue the school. Do not be passive, as it just emboldens the anti-Semites, and the harassment will only get worse. After all, they did this to a black person or LGBT. Would they get away with it? So
no,
why should they get away with it when it happens to you?
Exactly. We deserve the same protections as every other minority. Thank you so much, Dad, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
On this episode of Outspoken, we heard about the most effective ways of promoting our civil rights on campus. We spoke about the dangers of staying on the defense and about how absolutely crucial it is for Jewish students to stand up for themselves, to take advantage of legal representation and seek justice. I want to thank you for joining me this evening on Outspoken. Until next time, and remember, enforce your rights, cherish your heritage, and always be outspoken in your defense of the truth.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.